right, welcome to the beginning of this scenario analysis. I just want to say I haven't played this scenario. It's simply a exercise of taking a scenario, which I don't like to play very often. I don't want to play a scenario 5 or 6 times. It's interesting in post-game discussion about what things you learned about the scenario. And so that's something that you could probably take into your next game. Or if you wanted to play that same scenario again, say switching sides, something that both of you can then sort of make the balance play through. But the purpose of this is to simply take a scenario, carte blanche, and just go with it, and without any foreknowledge of what is included and what you need to look for, but just something that you as a player need to develop understanding of what the victory conditions are, understand the conditions of the board configuration, which can be very easily screwed up, understand the turn length, and whether not the turn length, but the game length, and how that impacts the conditions of the game. Who goes first, who sets up first, makes a huge difference. And the OB as well. Scenario special rules are always the deciding factor in determining how the scenario typically is conducted. A lot of times they're very common, very casual scenario special rules. Other times they're very extensive and somewhat confusing. So getting together with your opponent and understanding the key components of the scenario card, because the scenario card is the game, right? I mean, you don't have to set anything up. The scenario card is the game. You need to be able to understand all the information that the card gives you in order for you to practice the scenario and the conditions that the scenario is supposed to represent. So today's scenario, take it back. West of Lunga Ridge, Guadalcanal, 13th September 42. Colonel Merritt Edson had set up his first Paramarine Battalion on the east side of Lunga Ridge, while he deployed his first Raider Battalion to the west. On the night of the 12th September, leading elements of Major General Kiyotaki Kawaguchi's 35th Infantry Brigade attacked the Raiders, overrunning a platoon, forcing C Company back to the ridge, and bending the Raiders' front line from the east-west alignment to a north-south one. The next morning, the two companies of Raiders were ordered to retake those lost positions in a daylight attack. Okay, so this is pretty much just the defenders are going to be, so that right there, that setup should tell you that the Japanese are most likely going to be defending and the Marines are going to be attacking. And with the positions typically in the historical documents up here, that theoretically the directions that the units come in from the north, south, east, or west should reflect what we have in gameplay. Sometimes it's not that way. Sometimes it might be a mistake by the scenario, or the direction might be set improperly in the scenario. Me as a gamer, I don't really care what direction I come in, as long as the game is designed and balanced well enough. A couple hundred meters one way or the other is not going to really make that much of a difference to me. Yeah, sure, historically it's one thing, but I'm a gamer at heart first. Every single thing I do in the scenario, every single move takes away part of that historical accuracy. So it doesn't really need to run down to it. All right, so what do we see here first? One board O is used. Pretty much only half of it, the middle of it. And we'll go to the crop board in just a moment. What we see here is the victory conditions. The Americans win at game end. The Americans win at game end by controlling greater than or equal to 4 victory hexes. See Scenario Special Rule 2. So it doesn't tell you how many hexes there are. It just says greater than or equal to 4. And the Americans must control them at game end. And so what you see here is then, okay, the first thing coming to mind is the Americans need to satisfy these victory conditions. Do the Japanese, as the American player, you have to understand is, do the Japanese get a chance to retake the conditions, the victory points, or victory hexes in this case, after the Americans go? And by analysis of the next section, the turn record chart, you see that the Japanese sets up first, yet the American moves first. And heading on to, as what you see here, it looks like the Americans have units coming on turns 1 and 2. And note on turn 5, since the Americans move first, the Japanese do not have a second turn on that player turn. So the Japanese have 4 action turns this game, whilst the Americans have 5. So if the Americans control no objectives at turn 4, they have 1 more turn to control them, and if they do, that's it. The Japanese do not get the counterattack. So very important to understand whether or not that half turn at the end of the turn record chart is there, because if this game completely changes, if that little red triangle cutting off the Japanese portion of that player game turn is there, and so the Japanese get to counterattack. And we all know with the Japanese step reduction, that can be a very significant event. And controlling those hexes, with close combat hand to hand, it could be a game changer. This way, the Americans can, once if they secure them near the end of the game, more than likely they'll still retain control. Let's go over the OBs real quick. I'm not really concerned too much about them. You'll see them. So I'm going to scroll up here in just a second. I have to move the board move it manually. Pretty much, ELR 4, ELR 5, not going to worry about it. Setup on south of Hex Row V, you'll see that setup here. 8 squads, couple leaders, couple support weapons. Mortar is what we're going to look at. Mediums are what we're going to look at. Lights, don't really care. But the mediums and the mortars we're going to look at. As long as the same thing with the American side. The squads you'll see on board do not have an underscore. The 5s, let's remember that the underscore still applies. I will probably forget during the midst of this discussion. 14 squads essentially coming on. Turn 1 along the north edge. We're going to go over that. 2 mediums. Very important to understand why we have 2 mediums versus some lights. And these guys right here, just a couple guys, 6 squads, 1 medium, essentially reinforcements or a flanking side on the east side. And we'll go over that in just a second. The specific units other than the mediums mortar on both sides don't really, essentially it's just infantry. Let's go over some of the special rules they have in this particular scenario. Again, understanding scenario special rules is very critical. This determines how you conduct the game. So it cannot be reiterated enough that all the terms in this section here you must understand, and sometimes within one scenario special rule, it covers multiple concepts and may bounce between concepts. Unfortunately, that's the case in some scenarios. Right here, scenario special rule 2, which the victory conditions refer to, happens to be one of those. Taking a look at scenario special rule number 1, it's simple to kind of read, but it's kind of convoluted in its expression. PTO terrain is in effect. Kunai is jungle. Let's just pause right there. So all kunai is jungle. PTO terrain is in effect. If it does not specify that light jungle is in effect, all jungle is considered dense by rule. It doesn't need to state that it's dense. It's just PTO terrain. All jungle is dense. And then it goes on to say, interior jungle X kunai hexes, which means because kunai is jungle, it doesn't really need to state X kunai hexes, to be honest with you, because it's already converted that. Interior jungle, which is everything bordered by 6 hexes by jungle or the X kunai. Again, it's just it's redundant. I'm not sure why it needs to be restating the obvious. Our dense jungle, and so that in and of itself, with the first two other lines, is kind of silly to say that it's dense jungle because that's already the case. All other jungle hexes are light jungle. Yeah, you're kind of working backwards in that sort of area. Essentially, only the perimeter, anything that's next to an open ground hex or non jungle slash kunai, in case you don't do a terrain conversion, is light jungle. I just think that could have been done better, especially with the X kunai. You typically don't see that in many scenario special rules expressions. Maybe they do that to just remind you that you're supposed to read the second line. I don't know. It always states that kunai is jungle. You don't have to say X kunai. It's just whatever. Again, the concept is the first line says PTO is in effect, which means everything's dense jungle. And then you identify interiors are dense jungle, which it's already identified as such. And then all other jungle hexes are light jungle. So essentially all you really need to do is identify non-interior hexes are light jungle. And it's, I don't know. I mean, I guess you could write that 1,000 different ways, but that's not the cleanest. Number 2, the scenario special rule 2, which the victory conditions leads you to, which is very important because this identifies the victory hexes. Imagine that. Not sure why these aren't simply the hexes, the first sentence hexes K2, K3, M5, M7, and Q5, which I've denoted and marked on the map, are victory hexes. 90% of the time, in scenarios, that single line is in the victory control or the victory conditions section up here. Put it right here. Hexes K2, V3, whatever the hell they were, put them right here. Don't throw this down here. Don't. This is not where this needs to be. This needs to be up here to alleviate any confusion, because when you're reading the victory conditions as both players, this is the most important thing. If that information is here all the time, it's right at their fingertips. Now the second part of that, each victory hex uses dense jungle TEM. Again, that's very poor wording. Dense jungle TEM, you're identifying the victory hex as a dense jungle, maybe TEM. We'll get to that in a second. Again, in this here, dense jungle is the problem. And you'll see why. And you'll say, hey, Stu, that kind of makes sense. Or you're screwed out of your mind. Anyway, don't put the location of the victory hexes in the scenario special rules. It's not a special rule. It's identified as a victory condition. Do not put them here. If you write your own scenarios, don't put the victory condition shit in here. Never do that. Dumb. 3, in lieu of 8185, the Japanese may hip, which essentially gives 10% hip ability to the Japanese, in my understanding. This simply says you can do 2 squad equivalents in any single man counter. So if you look at the Japanese OB, they have 9 squad equivalents. So by the base rule, they'd only be able to hip 1 squad. This allows you to do 2 squads. This is a perfect example of a scenario special rule. In lieu of, which means it supersedes it, you get to do 2 instead of 1. Perfect example. And it says in lieu of. It doesn't mean you get to do 2 additional ones. Again, very good wording here. Very clear, very concise. Number 4, good order American leaders are considered Raider MMC. Why is that necessary? Simply because they are not denoted as the Raider MMC insignias. Some people might get a little anal about that. You would think that the leaders with those Marines are also Raiders, but certain situations, sometimes you might have an allied leader, something like that. This is just a good clarifying to alleviate any sort of confusion. Well, do my leaders get that ambush die roll if they get attacked by themselves? This says they're considered good Raider MMCs, the good order American leaders, which means you get your bonus for ambush. So this is another good scenario special rule, just to clarify that if these guys happen to be alone for whatever reason, that they are still considered Raider MMCs for the ambush bonus. Okay? So, first two, not so good. Unfortunately, they are the first two. Last two, very good, very solid SSRs. Say, Stu, I don't really see a difference between the two. Well, you will see. The first one I explained ad nauseum. The second one here, you'll see what's going on. So let me zoom out, and then we'll get right to the description here. All right, so here's the map. I've done the adjustments on Vassal, and marked. Actually, I missed one. Damn it. I missed two. This is an older map. This is not the map I used. Okay, whatever. So we have actually 2 additional locations, which I didn't adapt to this map because it has my north counter down here. It's always good to understand the direction of north. This is for you guys to understand. First turn Americans are coming on this direction. That this is north. That makes this side east. So it's important that you get north correct. If you got north as being this way, and then east would be over here, the game changes dramatically, right? Or if you got north this way and east being over there, same sort of thing. So it's good. And I sure hope to hell that I got north right, because O is usually on the A side. And so by the scenario card, the bottom side would be north, which is here. So hopefully that's the case. This is my pseudo turn card counter. It's a American turn, Japanese turn. There's only 5 turns. This is turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, and then the Yanks get to do the last turn. Okay, my little turn marker. So looking at the map and looking at the scenario special rule 2. The victory hexes are identified as such here. Hopefully those are the same hexes I noted in the scenario card. Let me double check those real quick. Say those are the correctly identified victory locations. The issues I have with that scenario special rule, obviously they're on the outside. So they are not going to be dense jungle hexes because they are not surrounded on the interior. As you see this one here, it's surrounded by 6 other jungle hexes. So the ones that aren't surrounded, essentially adjacent to open ground or a hill hex that has open ground on it, will not be. Obviously, I missed another one over here. W5 is an interior hex. W8 is not, because it's adjacent to X8. So there are a couple that I missed, unfortunately. And my other map, I caught them. W5. We're gonna mark those. Here we go. Where are we? Let me mark those. So we got W5. W5. N3 is another one. J5 is another one, and I think that's it. Yeah, I got this one up here. Technically, you might not consider this one of them. And this might be a big deal, to be honest with you. simply because, as you note here, right? So you the same reason I think this one should not be 1 is the same reason why X6 may or may not be 1. It won't matter whether X6 is or not. Well, it could to a certain extent. The differences between light jungle and dense jungle primarily is TEM. Light jungle's +1, dense jungle's +2. Dense jungle, and the secondary thing is dense jungle has a stacking capacity of 2 multi-min counters. The light jungle has the stacking capacity of 3 multi-min counters. So you might question some of these exterior hexes like this one, X6, especially since you've cut off the map. Let's say there were 3 jungle hexes on this side. Now, apparently right here and here, looks like there are some jungle hexes there. So the question that I would ask is X6 an interior jungle hex? And I would probably say no, simply because these external hexes here that are, quote, playable, they're considered open ground for off-board units. They would not be then considered jungle hexes because this is not adjacent to a jungle hex. But you could also argue saying, well, those are non-playable hexes in terms of being on board, so you might consider this an interior jungle hex. I could see that argument being had. The exact same reason why I marked this one up here, I had the same concept. Well, it's surrounded by jungle hexes. This should be an interior jungle hex. The other thing that dense jungle does is, with the light jungle, it allows line of sight along, the line of sight is as what you see on the jungle hexes. Essentially, the dense jungle is an inherent terrain. The entire hex is considered to be a woods, and it blocks line of sight along the edge. So if you were to fire, in this case, it really doesn't matter too much, because I don't really see it affecting any lines of sight anywhere other than from N3 to P3 maybe. The line of sight from N3 to P3 will be considered blocked because O4 is an interior hex, and therefore this hex side will block that line of sight. Again, N3 would be considered an interior hex. This should be dark green just as well. Imagine that. W5, the same thing. But the W5 won't do any lines of sight blockage. Again, because these are basic kind of jungles, are really not that big a deal. And they're all interior. The line of sight blockages won't be that effective. Here's another one. You've got a light jungle going to a dense jungle, but it's adjacent to another. That would be a blockage there. So the LOS affected won't be as impactful as you might first think. So that's all. But it's only going to be a certain number of hexes. But my problem with identifying with scenario special rule 2 that each victory hex uses dense jungle TEM +2. So this is a victory hex, a victory hex, a victory hex, victory hex, and victory hex. And yet we've had to identify all the dense jungle hexes. Why use the term dense jungle TEM instead of just saying +2 TEM? Just, all victory hexes are considered to be +2 TEM, period. That's straightforward. Saying it's dense jungle TEM only, that sort of thing. Don't reference the dense jungle. People might be confused that, well, it's the dense jungle TEM +2. Maybe it should be dense jungle 2. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. It just says use the dense jungle TEM. But why choose to add more words where you don't need them? Victory hexes, TEMs are +2. Period. It doesn't have to. You could just say victory hexes are considered wooden buildings, or have the wooden building TEM. What's the difference? It doesn't make any sense to repeat it. Again, I think that was just people trying to be fancy. I have no clue. No clue what the hell's going on. So anyway, again, those are sort of the reiterations of, and the reason why, that's the reason why, because none of these are dense jungle hexes by themselves, right? So none of them are dense jungle hexes by themselves. So it's important to note that in some scenarios you might have one of these might be a dense jungle hex. So, and then the question might be is, okay, that's a dense jungle hex, but what about these other guys? And again, you see VC plus 2 TEM right in the middle. This is a note that I always make. If you have something that are confusing, things like that, something you will easily forget. And again, that's another reason why I put some of this. This is the fortification modification that you have in Basel. And I've done that to, A, make the victory hexes much more visible. Other than, of course, the V's on them, but players can move counters on top of it. Move my guys over here. Now, where the hell's the victory control? I have no clue where it went, but you know, Q5 is where it went. So so that's that. So using the scenario special rule, this is just a generic setup. I kind of just threw this together, what I wanted it to with the Japanese setup. There's a variety of things you can do. They could set up on hex row V, which is right here. Okay. And south, which is the whole way over here. Lots of different, let me zoom in a little bit here. I'm going to zoom in too much. But I can zoom in certain areas when I need to. I probably won't need to, though. And I can erase those. But I decided to hip this unit here just for whatever. He's going to be covering open area here in case the Marines think it's clear and they just want to run to it. They might not want to if I have a guy up here. These guys, again, these upside down. These guys are not upside down, if you could see that. And then these guys up here are simply both my mediums and my 9-1 leader. And let's go into something about why I set this unit up here and why that's an important spot and how that spot or this spot here in K3 would completely change if you're dealing with an ASL scenario. So if you have an ASL player playing the starter kit, you're kind of new in the starter kit. You call your ASL expert player up. He says, "Yeah, I'll walk you through some SK. I played a little bit of Code of Bushido back in the day, and he's got his PTO charts and shit like that. And he comes over to your house. You got it set up waiting for him. You got his favorite tea waiting for him. Your dog's freshly bathed so he doesn't stink when he comes over, so you can pet him. Doesn't contaminate his hands to get your counters all dirty. And then you're in the middle of the game, and you've got these guys here, as I do, on level. By the way, that's level 1. So when I put that green thing up there, that's actually a hill hex. So that's why I have the level 1 identifier at that location. And there's a trail going up there. It doesn't say the trails are eliminated, so that's a level 1 dense jungle hex. Anyway, back to having fun with your buddy. And your dog went outside. So you set these units up here, and again, this is kind of bouncing with the same idea with the medium machine guns, which I have over here for the Americans. The plan for the Americans is to get these machine guns up here. And you say, well, what the hell do you need those up there for, Stu? You're not going to fire anything. There's nothing next to it except for one victory hex. Well, that's where SK and ASL differ. The ASL player wouldn't move his mediums up here, but the SK player would move his mediums up there. And you say, well, what the hell's the difference, Stu? What do you know that we don't know? Well, I don't know that you don't know any different, but you do know that SK only includes one elevation. So the S5 hill and the J1 hill over here, that's the highest elevation in the game. Now, of course, terrain, blocking terrain on the elevation theoretically as a higher, but you don't need to identify that terrain as blocking terrains because it's going to be at the same level and there's no other higher elevation above that. However, the terrain below you makes a difference. And I checked the starter kit rules, and correct me if I'm wrong, but under jungles, it does not specify the height of the terrain in the jungle, unless it's on the SK terrain card, which I did not see in the rules. So let me go check that real quick. All right, checking the chart, at least the first iteration of the SK chart, because I haven't bought the newest one. Not sure if they've adjusted those. But it simply states jungles as obstacles. So what that means is the SK player, the 9-1, the medium machine guns up in this corner, right? These bad boys right here can initiate fire on these guys over here. The SK player will know that, theoretically. The ASL player, what he knows is that jungle is a 2-level obstacle. So what he knows is he can't shoot past these. So based upon the differences in the game, and this is probably just an artifact of not having second levels, and therefore the dense jungles don't need to be identified as blocking terrain at level 1 as well. It just doesn't say that, which it might be considered necessary to. I don't know. There's not a lot of hill-to-hill fight with things in between, but I might be mistaken. If that was the intent, to leave them at base level, I have no problem with that. I don't really think it impacts gameplay too much. But in this specific instance, you know, these units here, these are open ground hexes, baby. And that's right next to the VC. And guess what? He can legit target almost every single hex on that hill, which makes it a strategic position for the Americans to avoid. And the other thing it does is if the Americans do realize that he can impact especially this victory hex from 2 mediums right here. That's what I saw when I looked at the scenario card, is why do you need 2 mediums? You know, up at the top, you've got a short area here, a couple lights would be fine, light machine guns here. You really don't need mediums. It might be a little bit overkill. Historically, maybe, but right here, tactically, the mediums would do well in this position, simply because both mediums and your 9-1 leader can sit down a fire group, and you can inflict 12 firepower upon that location by adding the 2 other squads for consistent number of turns. And simply because the 9-1 leader, that's going to be a 12+1. So that's going to be a decent morale check upon these Japanese players. And again, why is that important? Based on your victory conditions, how many do we need? 4. Well, since there's 5 here, guess what? The Americans have to have one of these at all costs. He has to control one of those victory conditions. Getting these units up into this position puts pressure on one of them. So that's literally the only one he needs to have. He can't fire upon K2. He's got to get down and dirty and nitty-gritty to get to K2. He doesn't necessarily have to do that. He could break and damage and destroy people in K3 to make it assaultable. So that's what I saw when I saw the medium machine guns, is that you can actually use their range. Now, any Japanese firing back, yes, he's got mediums as well, but his squads, would be the same, 1, 2, 3, 4. But for him, what's the special thing that you have to realize with the Japanese. Typically, the crews will be manning the medium machine guns. The squads could man them, mind you. You could move your 4.47s up here and man your things up here. Their breakdown will go down, but do you really care, right? You're only going to take a couple shots with them. How many turns do you have? Japanese game ends at turn 4. He's not going to be at the location at the first turn. Second turn, he might be. He might be at the second turn. Third turn for sure. Fourth turn for sure if he wants to set up a fire base up there. And then fifth turn, he might be up there as well. So you're only going to be firing maybe 2 turns at that location. Do you necessarily need to put the 228s on them? Or stack a 4.47 there to get the extra firepower? You actually have to have 2. The choice is yours. But just because the 228s can use those without the increased breakdown ability, if you look at the item itself, I just flipped it up, that it's got a breakdown of 11 anyway. So you would turn into a breakdown 10. That's not great. Got to be honest with you. That's a 1 in 6. So if you could avoid it, you can, but there are always options. I saw some starter kit players put some of the mediums on their 4.47s, and then it got me thinking, it's like, hey, not actually a bad idea. You might put those crews with the mortars, which in some games have a stronger influence than the mediums. And it's not a bad decision at that point at all, to be honest. So, again, a generic setup here. We're looking at, this is just to defend for the most part. This is a Japanese thought process of defending against a strong flank attack in case the Americans want to jam all these guys through here. Right? Which you can very well do. These guys at turn 1 is going to be on essentially 2, 4, 6. You know, you might have some advances. If they all CX, they'll go essentially 2, 4, 6 advance. So essentially they'll be in this general vicinity. Theoretically, if that's what you're looking at initially. And the same thing down here. These units down here, if they go 2, 4, 6, they're going to be at this position on turn 2, which is right outside a couple of victory points. Turn 2 here, 2, 4, advance. Turn 3, 2, 3, 4, advance. Turn 4. So you're looking at the units on the bottom, even though they're a smaller force, can be much more of a problem. And so with the Americans, with that, let's look at how many movement factors that these guys on the right have to expend to get back to here. Can these guys even get there? Is that even a realistic goal? So let's do a couple check marks. And this is what you guys need to do, is when you're in your game, say, oh, I'm just going to move my guys over here, and I'm not going to CX or this, that, and the other. It will determine whether or not you might want to CX. So, again, the Japanese can set up at V. And if they want to set up some guys here to slow the Americans down, we are going to cover that. But let's assume that this is the case. And there's pretty much little to no resistance the entire way back to here. And let's say we start up here. Let's say these guys, a couple guys start up here. With or without, let's put them with a leader. Let's just say, let me deselect them all. This guy and a leader. He starts up here. He's going to come on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 by CXing or double timing, but CXing shortly. And let's just say we advance here. That's turn 1. And he's CX, so he can't do that next turn. So turn 1 is right here. Let me mark that. Turn 1 in this general vicinity, right? That's turn 1's movement. Down here on the bottom, let's say we go to X10, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, advance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, advance. So if we have a leader we can kind of go here about turn 1 with no resistance. All right, and that's putting everybody at CX. And that's something that you might want to take into consideration is, simply by looking at the map, you might want to say, this looks like a close combat. It's going to be close combat all day long. So if that's what you interpret, then you have to reflect upon what your abilities have. And this also comes into play in scenario special rule number 4, that the leaders are considered Raider MMCs. I believe the Raider MMCs means they get a -1 on their ambush dice roll. I'm not sure if that's all the time, but I'm going to assume that's the case right now. You guys can correct me, but I'm going to assume that's a -1 dice roll modifier. Very similar to the Japanese. So if your -1 dice roll modifier cancels essentially the Japanese -1 dice roll modifier, what other external factors do we have? Terrain and unit condition. Terrain is jungle. You are going to be, if you are ambushing into the attacker into a jungle, you'll be +1. If you are CX, you'll be an additional +1, and your opponent will have a -1. So if you ambush a Japanese unit that is concealed in jungle, he is going to be -3 on the dice roll. You're going to be, he's going to be -3, and you're going to be, wow, like +2. So that's almost a guaranteed ambush in that sort of instance, because you most likely won't be concealed because he can reveal his concealment to show you that he's really, actually, they're dummies. So you just lose your concealment if you move in the open ground of an enemy unit. I'm pretty sure that's the case in starter kit. But anyway, if it's not the case in ASL, you could reveal temporarily to make him lose concealment. So that makes a big difference. So you're going to be in a heap of trouble in the ambush situation. But we'll get to that in just a moment. Turn 1 movement here. Turn 2 movement. Let's go 2, 4, 6. Advance. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We could possibly get to N1. If we stick to the jungle, we can get to here. If we're down here, 2, 4, 6, advance. Let's just be conservative. If we're down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, well, turn 2, these guys are going to come on. So let's just call it 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, advance. This is turn 2's movement with no opposition. Okay? And turn 2 down here in the bottom, given up the opposition here, we're probably going to get to about right here. We could go further over here, but let's just say this is turn 2 for the bottom guys. All right, this is just typical movement. So it looks like it's going to be, obviously the Japanese are outnumbered on both fronts. So they have to play a fallback defense. You don't want to be caught up. Or you want to blast guys. And this is the reason why I have these guys set up as such. This is just an example. It's not the perfect defense. I'm sure it's worthless as can be. But it's just my first impressions. And then after turn 2, we've got turn 3. Let's say 2 hexes, 2 forward, then advance. Without any double time, 2 forward, advance. That'll put turn 3 right here for these guys. Turn 3 over here would be encroaching on the same area. Okay? So it looks like in 3 turns with unimpeded movement, the Americans can pretty much get back to the back objectives. Okay? So you can either block them with bodies, or you can let them roam because he needs to collect 4. So that's why this guy, let me change color. That's why that's why this guy right here is hidden, and these guys are hidden. Note that both of these crews together is the equivalent of a squad. And note that the scenario special rules said 2 squad equivalents. Here's one squad. Here's two crews, which is another squad's equivalence. So if the opponent doesn't understand a squad equivalent, which he damn well should, when you reveal these units up here on the hill firing on these guys over here, and you've got two guys that just revealed themselves saying, hey, that's the two guys that he hid from me, and everyone else is going to be concealed. And that's the two guys he hid from me, so he's got nobody left. So guess what happens to him? He's free and clear. The only thing we have to do, we have to avoid American movements into our location. Is this the best place? Probably not, because it's next to open ground. They kind of move faster. You're going to assume the Americans are going to be moving faster through their open ground. Do they need to? As we showed here, essentially by going through the woods, he really doesn't need to go into the open ground. Doesn't really need to. So, again, that might be a trick to throw off, and that's another reason why I hid both of these guys instead of just two squads to throw them off as well. Again, it takes a lot of counters off the map too. So, that's the kind of movement that you have to look at initially, and that's the perfect movement option. So let's say you're stuck a turn behind, then turn 4 is about right here on the border. This is turn 4, so you've got one turn to take it. So very important to understand that. Now, let's try the extreme measure, and this is why these guys are down here, and this guy is right here. Let's assume the American wants to take the open ground route, right? Which would be reasonable. The American wants to take the open ground route to that location. Let's see how long that would take just by moving the open ground. Remember, they have smoke, so it's not unlikely that that would be a bad service. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Advance. We're going to assume a leader first. Turn 1 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Advance. Turn 2 right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then that's about it. Advance. We have turn 3 there. So instead of turn 3 being about right here, I think we denoted, turn 3 is actually in the location. So that makes this one turn faster of movement by going in there. Obviously it should, right? Because we don't have all the woods and theoretically all the jungle screwing with our movement factors. Look how many extra movement factors we save. I mean, we saved more than a turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 open ground hexes. So that's easily a full turn's movement. So unlikely that's going to be the case because you know that he's going to be dropping back in defense. But consider this. I was going to consider this in my approach to the scenario is all these units here, well, a good number of them could start here on this side, right? Some guys can penetrate through here and make it to the hill with the medium machine guns, because that's where the medium machine guns are going. Right? ×2. Probably the leader. Probably the -1 leader, right? Because we need him to destroy anything that sits up here, because anybody sits up here is going to be firing this direction, this direction, this direction, and that direction. What might be a good weapon to have up there? Medium machine guns? Yeah, that might be one of them. The mortar that I set right here would be another excellent one. And that's why the mortar's right there. The mortar can shoot 2 hexes here, 3 hexes there. This might be, it's probably not LOS, but he could fire there, and I've got good supporting units here that could blast all the units in this area. So the mortar's protected by 2 other, well, essentially 3 full squads. We're not going to lose the mortar in that sort of situation. If we are, we're just bad luck. But anyway, then we can move our mortar, when we change the blue here, back up to here. And then the mortar can take up a secondary defensive position by shooting every single hex that has LOS to it and defend there. Also, the mortar is a range of 1, and it still can reap its benefits of a mortar. And why do we care about a mortar? Well, the one thing you have to understand is that the mortars will incur a -1 dice roll modifier after it scores a hit against any units in the jungles. Any -1s to hit. The thing is, it will never do that on units in dense jungle other than this one right here, because that's the only one it can really see. So another thing you have to understand are mortars may not fire out of dense jungles. Any dense jungle hex you see, the mortar may not fire out of. So right there, pretty much eliminates half the map of where you should be setting up your mortar. You know, you shouldn't be setting up your mortar maybe in these spots down here, because there's no woods to take advantage of. The air burst is not going to be there. And if you move back, because you're not going to be moving, I mean, the Americans probably could move toe-to-toe with you. If you get stuck here or here, anywhere along this zone, you can't fire back at them with the mortar because you simply can't fire out of it. It's just dense jungle. So you want to keep out of the dense jungle. Remember, this is a dense jungle hex, which really needs to be denoted in my example. Make sure this guy doesn't back up one. And so that's the concept there. But the second movement option that the Americans might consider is that fast move down here. So we can calculate that. We can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, advance. So here's turn 1's movement just for the end around. Remember, we want to take advantage of all this open ground to get behind it very similarly here. And so we can go here, advance, and let's say we take some other units, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then he's going to advance here. So it's turn 1 with the leader and a couple squads. Actually, we can just move those. Let me pick those guys up real quick. Let's say we move the 8-0 here. And then these guys, let's say these go over here. Okay, turn 1. These guys will likely move back or die where they stand. They continue to move. 1, 2, 3, 4, advance here. He can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, advance there. So now we're at turn 2, and what have we done here? Turn 2, these guys are coming on. So everyone can be rushing this situation. So any casualties these guys take can be easily replaced by all of these units. So if they're moving up here, they're going to be, these Japanese are going to be swarmed by more American units. And then these units just begin to push with all of these units on down below. They get an extra leader. Now there are 3 leaders on this side, which means rally will be extremely heavy. These units over here, you're going to have the 9-1 and a couple squads. Maybe just push to the hill and see what happens. Because we could always try to take Q5 later in the game. It may not be necessary to take it early. So this is another possibility. So these guys can be down here. This is turn 2 movement. Can they make it? Sure, they can make it. Yeah, they're going to be shot. They're going to be shot by this guy here and this guy here, most likely. Right? But if you move these guys down here, or maybe if they got here in turn 1, and then you move them behind, right? Do they fire here first to stop these guys from penetrating this potential direction they're going? Or do they fire this direction against potential Americans that might be setting up over here? Most likely Americans probably come on here. They'll know. Make your enemy make that decision. So that's something that I was thinking about. Again, I haven't decided which way to go with those units. We'll see what happens. But I'm just going to give this, I just threw the setup over here. And again, 4 out of 5 of the victory locations the Americans must control by the end of turn 5. The Americans have 5 action turns. That's it. This unit here is designed to become unhip, come out of hip in turn 4, and go assault move, advance phase, concealed, of course. If no Americans are there, the Americans have to pull back whatever front they're at, and they could probably still deal with it, especially if the mediums are up on this hill. They'll probably sit there the whole game. This guy will probably have a problem. And knowing that, his decision to come out and hit may change earlier. So again, these are just things that that I think about when I'm looking through a scenario, especially the movement option. You always have to go through the movement steps. What we covered with the movement steps, you know, and covering the zones they can move, turn one, oops. And covering the zones we can move, yeah, we can go here at turn 1, we can be here at turn 2, sort of thing. Maybe here at turn 3. This is what is necessary for you to project how far you have to go. Can you run directly down here? Is that possible, Stu? Let's try it. Let's just say we want to run right down the middle of the dense jungle so we don't get shot by anybody that's not adjacent to us, because all of those are by definition interior jungle hexes. So if we counter exhaust with a leader, let's do it without a leader and see how far it goes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're here in turn 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 2, 4, 6. What is it? No, that's open ground. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Advance. This is advance right here. My bad. I'm an idiot. All right, turn 1 there. 2, 4, advance, because we're counter exhausted. We're here at turn 2. 2, 4, 6, advance. Here at turn 3. And we might want to use the trail in this one here. So go 2, 4, and then we could advance up here, 5, 6. This is 1, 2, 3. This is turn 4. All right? And then we get to attack here. So even going down through the dense jungle and not the open ground, we could do that again. So just, you know, and that's something that you can do too, is count the spots, and then you can just put out, you might want to, you know, you could put out a concealment counter. Like if you're playing face-to-face, you could take one of your concealment counters and you could say, okay, put on the side over here, and then put another one about the hex row you're going to be in the next time, and then just kind of planning it out. And I could be at this row, third hex, and your opponent, you know, kind of throw them alongside over here. And your opponent might not know what you're doing, but you're counting out how many turns it takes to get there. So you'd have 4 concealment counters here, and that's your gauge. If you are here on turn 4, you are a full turn behind. You are not getting to K2, K3. You then need to focus your activities, not moving that direction. You might need to focus your activities. If you're here, right here at turn 4, if you're here at turn 4, you can go 2, 4, 6, advance. Or maybe secure this one if nobody's there. Or defend it from his turn 4 counterattack. Right? Or move up here and defend this one by being able to lay down fire at least at 2 adjacent hexes. Right? You can't move him this way because he will have no impact. Because your turn 5, you're just done. And you might not want to be CX at the end of the turn. So again, always gauge where you are in relation to where you need to be at all times. Right? Don't let your opponent win by default. Right? You need to move. The Japanese don't need to move. The Japanese can simply pick these guys up, and these guys can just move up here, and these guys can just move over here, and these guys can just like run over here. Or hell, they can all run this direction. And if you're assaulting, advancing, assaulting, oh, I get attacked, a couple guys break, assaulting, advancing. You know, these guys might be able to do it. These guys can't. You're losing time. You are on a time budget in this game. Time is your worst enemy. Not the counters that are on the board. Time is your worst energy. And as you can analyze, let's analyze these guys. How can these guys make it there? Well, if they simply assault move on the board, they say, I'm not going to get shot. I'm just going to advance on the board. So they advance 1 hex on the board. And then they assault move to the 2nd hex, and then advance phase to the 3rd hex. That's turn 3 because these guys come on turn 2, right? And then the assault move, advance phase, that's turn 4. And then the assault move, and then the advance phase, that's turn 5. So even these guys, when the assault move advance phase, they can only go 8 hexes during the course of the scenario. So even these guys need to move. And so therefore, if you put a body wall over in this general direction, which is necessary, because if you don't put a body wall here, let's say you put all these guys up here, because your units are on the board. Most of your units are on the board, so he'll see a whole bunch of Japanese units over in this general area, right? Guess what? These guys just double time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Advance. And the game's over. The game is already over at that point. You know, six Marines. He's got 8 guys. Even if he runs them all back here, these guys are following him. So understand that units beyond the first turn entry, which are these guys over here for the Americans, these guys are going to have 0 impact on your Japanese units on turn 1, unless you set your units on Hex Row V. We already know how far the Americans can go. You don't need to set guys way to hell up here. Most of those guys will be overrun. You're already outnumbered. He already outnumbers you with those guys. These guys are the problem down here at the bottom. These guys are the problem. Not necessarily these guys. If you could delay and destroy these guys early, these guys have a big problem. Because these guys can get there turn 3 easy. We already calculated these guys are on turn 4. Even though they come on a turn early. So, and there's lots of open ground in between here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Advance. The Americans can actually get to M5 on turn 1. Turn 2. And then 2, 4. 2, 4, 8. These guys are a much bigger threat. Much bigger threat. So, consider that when, again, analyzing a game. This is my first take on this. I could be completely off. But that's what I'm going to go through. I'm going to have the setup like I did before, try and play through it. I invite you guys to watch that. Just hopefully see if my my thoughts kind of correspond with results. One thing that you might want to do as the Americans in here, that you have to take into consideration, and then I'll leave you with this one last thought. What are the Japanese known for, gentlemen? Specifically. So we're going to have, let's say we're going to split our units up in groups of 2. Let's say we got a leader with this guy here, this guy here. It didn't work so well. All right. So we got this engage going on. So we've got units over here that are moving together, units that are here moving together, units over here. We don't really care about these right now. We're just going to use these as an example. All right. So Japanese. If I had a German 467 or a Russian 447 or anybody else, if they are 1-to-1 against Japanese, and the Japanese ambush you or are the attacker in close combat, right? If they are the attacker in close combat, what do the Japanese get? They get to use hand-to-hand close combat on you. That's very bad. Because if he's doing 1-to-1 with a 447 against your 447 or 436 or whatever the case may be, he needs to roll a 7, base 7 without any modifiers, and most of the time he'll have a -1, right? Because he'll be stealth considered, the Japanese get -1 close combat, right? So he'll have at least a -1, which means he needs an 8 for a casual reduction. However, what do we have as the para-marines here? And again, these aren't specifically the Raider units. These are para-marine units, but we're going to have the Raider units. Let's say we jump 1 unit in close combat, and we get ambushed, right? So he's going to have hand-to-hand close combat at 1 to 2 minus 2. 1 to 2 minus 2 means he needs to roll an 8 for casualty reduction. But if we have 2 of them in there, what does that do? That now changes it. Let's say we get ambushed. Let's take the worst case scenario. We get ambushed. He's at a 1 to what? 4 to 10 is a 1 to 4 because it's one. Essentially, it's 1 to more than 1 to 2, which is a 1 to 3 column. But there is no 1 to 3 column, so it gets boosted to 1 to 4. So it's now a 5 base to kill in the hand-to-hand table. Now he needs to roll a -1 because he's Japanese and a -1 because he ambushed us. So that means he needs to roll a 7 for a casualty reduction. Now what do we need for a casualty reduction as the Americans? We need a 10 to 4. That's a 2 to 1, right? And if we were ambushed, we get to add 1. I'm not worried about counter-exhaustion. Counter-exhaustion you probably don't want to do in this case. So he needs a 7 for a CR. You would then need an 8 for a CR on him. So you have an advantage in close combat a little bit, assuming he doesn't kill you outright, of killing him 2 to 1, even though you're at worse odds going into hand-to-hand close combat. These 5 firepower squads make a big difference in equalizing that close combat chart. 1 to 1, assuming no ambush, right? 1 to 1. He's at 1 to 2, and you're at 1 to 1, and you're minus 1 to the ambush. Yeah, you're -1 to the ambush, right? So he gets -1 in close combat, but at least you're at 1 to 1. But if you have 2 guys in there, it's much stronger to go against the 1 unit. Obviously by numbers, but in this case, you only go up to 2 to 1, but he goes down to 1 to 4. Surprisingly enough, this is a 1 to 4 attack for the Japanese player. So understand that this math exists in this game, and you need to take advantage of it. This is a 1 to 4 attack. Not great even for the Japanese standards, but still can do damage. And guess what? If the Japanese have 8 squads and you have 14 squads, you could almost do a 2-for-1 exchange and still win the game. So even if both of you eliminated yourself and they're out of the game, that is almost an acceptable exchange. Because as you dwindle his units down, he'll have nobody else left to defend the other objectives. We don't necessarily want to do that, but sometimes, bad things happen. Again, if you lose all 6 of units coming in here and you eliminate 3 full squads, that means he only has 5 squads to deal with against your other remaining units of 8. And pretty much you can lose a 2 to 1 ratio in close combat, and you simply won't do that. You simply can't roll that bad. Not even for some of the players that I know. They can't roll that bad. So hopefully you learned something from this. I'll go ahead and do a replay, a little solo quick replay of this. Shouldn't take too long. And then get back to you guys on kind of how it went. I'll actually show you that, so it won't be that long of a video. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. And go out there and play some ASL. Whether it's SK or ASL, doesn't matter to me. Just go play, have fun, and keep rolling.